once you understand that the non-aggression principle really is valid, like it actually is a perfectly good moral law, there aren't any exceptions. Once you actually really get that, then you're able to see through the propaganda. You're able to see through all of these events that are transpiring for the purpose of deceiving you into accepting more aggression, because you'll realize if they're pushing aggression or if they're acting aggressively but telling me it's for the greater good or for safety, I know that's false because it's a contradiction in terms. If you're being aggressed against, you're not safe. So it's just one event after another used as a supposed justification for aggression by the powers that be, right? There's a shooting, and so what is the solution, so-called solution that's offered? Oh, the state is now going to, further restrict gun access and, disarm nonviolent people, which is an aggressive act. So it's not a valid solution. If you think there's like this gray area, like, well, it might reduce the number of shootings, you're really disconnected from just basic morality. You can't commit a preemptive attack legitimately. You can't say, well, you might hurt someone in the future, so I get to do something aggressive towards you first. And that's what disarming nonviolent people is. It's a preemptive attack, which is unethical and totally irrational. It assumes, if you accept it, it's assuming that the person carrying out the preemptive attack is definitely correct, definitely not going for a power grab, definitely, morally upright. But again, it's false on its face because you can't be morally superior if you're committing aggression. So the whole dynamic is ridiculous. And yet, this is what most people are unfortunately going along with. So the repeated scenario is, oh, there's another shooting. Okay, more gun control. That's the solution. The state disarming nonviolent people, the state violating people's God-given right to be able to defend themselves from criminals, from, people that have lost their mind, or from governments, right? From anyone who's aggressive, having the ability to defend yourself, God-given right. Because God's law is to love others, God, and ourself. And abuse is the opposite of love. So in order to be able to love yourself and others, like your family, you need to be able to defend yourself. That's part of loving action, is resisting abuse. So if you don't have that ability, that's going against God's law. You can't carry out the loving action of defense. And gun-free zones are the number one choice for these people to carry out these shootings, right? Because probably nobody there that could stop them. And even if state law enforcement has been there, they haven't even intervened in many cases. So obviously, if every able-bodied man there was armed, they could stop the threat almost immediately, which has actually occurred many, many times, where what could have been a much worse event, more lives lost, it was made into, it was prevented from escalating to that level. Less lives were lost because the person that was being aggressive was stopped by a good guy with a gun, like the old saying, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. It's just so basic, and yet people are actually falling for this propaganda that giving the state the power to disarm everybody in this preemptive attack again, just assumes their superiority, which is proven false in the very action itself of the disarmament. So you don't even have to look at all of history, but if you did, there would be a mountain range of further evidence that they're not morally superior. And additionally, if it's government of, by, and for the people, right, aren't we supposed to be on the same level? Why would they be morally superior if they are made up of the population that they're supposedly representing? And then the medical tyranny of the past 2.5 years or so, again, it's just preemptive attack. It's saying, oh, well, there's an illness, and so there's this danger, there's something bad going on, people getting sick. And so here's the solution: us having more power and control, abusive control, us taking over your own medical choices for yourself and your children, us claiming ownership of your body, right? A clearly abusive act, just like disarming a nonviolent person is abusive. I mean, it's just so amazing to me that people can't grasp this, and they think it's somehow more complicated when it's on a big scale. They're like, oh, well, it's, on a neighbor to neighbor scale, sure, your neighbor can't just go over to your house and say, I'm going to take all your weapons and make you defenseless. That wouldn't be right. And yeah, your neighbor can't go, come knock on your door with a briefcase full of, you know, pharmaceuticals and who knows what, and say, oh, I want to inject this, into you and all your children. And, I'll be back next week for their follow-ups. You know what I mean? No one would accept that because it's obviously abuse of control. So why do you think it's any different? Just because, I mean, I know why, because if you do think it's different, it's because you're an idol worshiper. I mean, literally, like, you are appealing to authority so hard that you basically become this masochist where you just think, oh, well, whatever they want to do to me, I'll just take it, and almost take pleasure and pride in it. Like I said, it's masochistic in a way. It's just foolish, really. And now we got talk of who knows what flying objects, and, is there going to be an alien invasion? Well, if there is a so-called alien invasion, guess what the government is going to say the so-called solution is? Giving them more power and control, right? It's going to be like lockdown, stage 2. It's going to be curfews and, all in the name of rallying, together to defend humanity, if that's the way the scenario goes. But it's always their go-to, whatever the danger is, whether it's one person, out of their mind, on all these pharmaceutical drugs, committing violence, or it's, so-called aliens, shooting lasers from the sky, or it's an illness, whatever the threat is, which is either real or theoretical or manufactured, or, a mix of all three. They always just give the same so-called solution. It's always the same dialectic of, here's the problem, wait for the reaction, which is basically just fear, and then they offer the same old solution, which is them being more abusive, and everyone kind of going, almost everyone going along with the idiocy of preemptive attack as a actual legitimate way to interact with people on the planet. Like, imagine going up to someone and say, well, I think you might, hurt someone in the future, so I'm just going to hurt you now first, right? That's all it is. That's what preemptive attack is. That's their go-to. They're not going to be outright, they're not going to be open about their intent to just treat everyone like livestock. So they have to always play the safety card. They have to always play the, oh, we're doing this for the greater good card. Because they don't want to just say, oh, we're actually, satanic psychopaths that want to literally, turn all of society into a human farm, more so than it already is. We want to make humans more and more like our livestock, and then again with the so-called climate crisis, what again is the solution? More restrictions on people and the way they can live, and putting them in these, so-called green cities that are little more than, fancy concentration camps, right? So less and less freedom for you, more and more control for them, in the name of safety, right? In the name of making the world better, right? Because in that scenario, oh, it's global warming, in the other scenario, it's aliens, or in this scenario, it's a shooting. But whatever the scenario, accepting their aggression is not a good idea. It's never a valid solution. And it really is that simple. And I just find it disheartening that more people don't get that. Like, they really think they're more intelligent for thinking it's more complicated than that, when it never is and never has been. There's a reason why it's God's law, right? God is omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, right? Perfect, infinite, loving intelligence. And the law he gave us through Jesus was the greatest commandments, which is a law of comprehensive love, to love God, others, and ourselves. And there's no exceptions. Jesus didn't say the law is the greatest commandments unless there's a crisis. But yet that's the same foolish concept that everyone keeps accepting. Oh, well, yeah, normally love is the answer, and and therefore abuse never is, since it's the opposite of love. But look at this crazy event happening. Well, now it must be an exception. And so you're just getting duped over and over and over again through all these various scenarios. Again, whether it's a shooting, whether it's an illness. And again, whether the event is manufactured or not is irrelevant as far as what the valid solution is. The valid solution is never going to be more abuse towards other people. If you want to prevent an illness, well, then help people become healthier. Give them health advice, but supply them with nutritious food and all their vitamins and minerals and omega fatty acids, and all of the things that their body need to have an optimum immune system, right? Like, that would be a valid solution. But in no case is claiming ownership of their body and abusively controlling them and coercing them to take whatever medicine you deem is the right one. In no case is that valid. And again, it's obvious on a neighbor-to-neighbor level. So obviously people are not looking at the government, as equivalent to their neighbor. They put them on a pedestal. They idol worship them. And I understand that they're presented to you as, these, authorities, these experts that we should all be like looking at as our, like, parental protectors. It's just an appeal to authority. It's just an assumption that they are actually superior. But again, it is contradicted immediately. Like, you don't even need to look at all of history or current events where you have all these abusive people in positions of power. If the solution they're offering is abuse, then how is it logical to put them on a pedestal of superiority? Why would you pedestalize an abusive person? I think the answer to that is probably that you don't see it as abuse, right? You think, oh, well, what they're doing isn't abusive, they're helping us, right? But again, if you put it on the neighbor-to-neighbor level, you'd say, well, if my neighbor did that to me, it wouldn't be helpful. It would actually be criminal, right? So, how does an action that is criminal for you or I to do to each other, how is it that an action that is clearly unethical and criminal, when one so-called regular person does it to another, somehow becomes the opposite of criminal and the opposite of unethical and becomes virtuous and caretaking just when some other person does it who happens to be on your TV screen? It doesn't make any sense. That that kind of ethics is baseless. It's just moral relativism, you know, to an extreme. And people are not waking up to that fundamental ethical reality, so they just keep pulling the same scheme, the same deception, the same Hegelian dialectic over and over again. The same problem, reaction, and then so-called solution. So whatever is going on in the news and whatever is going on in world events, don't accept becoming livestock as the solution, because that is not making the world better. I don't know why you would think becoming the livestock of these crazy people at the top of the pyramid is some kind of way to utopia. It's the complete opposite. It's a dystopia. All right, thanks for listening.